Welcome to Speaking of Spirituality, a podcast to share about the path of spiritual awakening. I'm your host, Amelia McLean, and I am so excited to be showcasing some inspiring stories and exploring some interesting topics, all under the umbrella of spirituality. So without further ado, let's dive right in. So tell me, what does spiritual awakening mean to you?
So that's a really good question. And it's funny because I don't know if I've ever really been asked that before. So as I think about that, to me, I think a spiritual awakening, even though it might imply it's just like this moment where you just become awakened, I think it's more of this journey. But I think this process of where we actually end up having to go through something that makes us feel like we're dying, that we're going through a death and rebirth process, where we're breaking down belief systems and structures that we've inherited, so we can allow that to go through, or the parts of us that have inherited that to go through this death cycle of shedding these beliefs. But often that process gets triggered by things that happen to us. So if we're not already kind of going into that journey, the universe is going to be like, oh, bam, boom, I'm going to floor you. And oh, bam, you think you're ready and, doing well, bam, I'm going to floor you again. And it's just like these things happen that end up making you take time to just sit with yourself and do the self journey, going into the shadow. And when you go through that process, you really do feel like you're dying, which is why a lot of people don't do the personal work, because it's fucking hard, right? And you really do feel like you are going through a dying process. But when you can look at it as a cycle, as, the butterfly that starts as the caterpillar, and that caterpillar creates a cocoon for itself, right? And then in that cocoon is when you're going dormant and you're going dark. That's that shadow time, right? That's the death of the ego, is when we go into that hibernation. But when we do that work and we work through it, and we can shed these beliefs that we've inherited that have been programmed into us, then we get to emerge out the butterfly. And to me, that's the spiritual awakening. It's the growth. It's like, oh, I've tapped into something that's beyond this shadow. It's beyond this belief. It's beyond this thought. It's beyond this criticism. It's beyond this judgment. And it's a different perspective, and I think part of it is also kind of getting out of victim mentality and emerging into being able to see this different perspective, the spiritual perspective. And to me, that's the spiritual awakening. So it's getting to that point of, instead of saying that these things have happened to me, these things have happened for me. These things have happened for my growth, for my journey, for my experience. And what can I take from this, and how can I give back to the world in a better way? Mm-hmm. And to me, that's kind of my interpretation and my experience of how I could describe a spiritual awakening.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah. I'm gonna have to make a second part to my that sounds beautiful. I can take a little things.
Thanks.
There were similarities for sure. Yeah, ego death being a big part of that, and yeah, part of you dying, that you're making room for the truth, and who you really are.
Right. And I always like to think of it too as that spiraling up, and it's like, sometimes we get stuck, and it's okay to be stuck, or like that feeling of like you're in the rock bottom, because sometimes you have to hit rock bottom, because you have to not be able to go any lower to sometimes be able to realize that the only way is up. Yeah. Right. And to me, I think that's another way of kind of thinking about spiritual awakening, is just like hitting that rock bottom. And it's okay to sometimes stay there for a while. That's everyone's individual journey. But the idea is we want to spiral out of that. And so for me, a big part of my spiritual awakening is actually just looking at cycles, looking at everything cyclically. So I love following the seasons. Even though in Humboldt here, we don't always have like definition of seasons in our environment, but just tuning into the energies of the seasons and tuning into like the foods that grow during the seasons, and tuning into the energies and qualities of different seasons and just bringing that in for balance. And looking at astrology has been a big part of like me understanding my spiritual journey and being able to have kind of a roadmap and context. And so I think when we tune into cycles of nature, that's a way of connecting to spirits. Right. So that's part of the spiritual awakening. I think most people who have gone through some kind of spiritual awakening or journey, we are really connecting to cycles, and we're connecting to the ebb and flow of life, and we're connecting to spirit in different ways, to whatever ways that are individual to us. And when we do that, just like every year we have a spring, summer, fall, and winter, every year our bodies and our minds and our emotions are going through the same kind of cycles and patterns. And that's also like the other analogy I like to think of besides the butterfly is the phoenix rising out of the ashes. When you look at astrology, every planet and every sign is like affiliated with elements and qualities and energies. And so as we start to kind of look at how those energies influence our life and influence how we feel and just bring things up in certain moments, and other moments maybe things aren't coming up and we get that chill moment being like, okay, cool, I get to like digest this and integrate, and then all of a sudden bam, something comes through and you're like, wow, the moon must have changed signs. You know, so it's kind of fun. And to me it's like, you know, I'm a Virgo, so I'm very analytical. That's part of my journey, is being able to bring balance into my Virgo qualities, because, you know, the bad side of Virgo, or I should say the bad side, but the shadow side of Virgo is criticism, judgment. You know, we are very analytical, so sometimes it can be hard for us to, when we get very caught up in our minds, to like get into our bodies and sometimes get into our emotions, but at the same time we're very emotional beings too, and we're that maiden, we're very connected to that motherly kind of quality, very nurturing. And so emotions are kind of a big deal for us, but at the same time, we're meant to hold it together. We're meant to like keep everything organized and be focused on details and the big picture at the same time. And while we're looking at the big picture, we're organizing all the details and we can see it all. And sometimes it's hard for us to remember not everyone thinks the way that we think. There's a lot that goes on in our heads. And, you know, and I'm also ADD. So sometimes it's like, part of my journey has really been teaching this to slow down, tune in to my feelings, tune into my somatic sensations, and find that balance of, yes, being analytical and understanding things, being that scholar, because I love science, I love studying. I have to be like, well, why? I want to understand. I'm very logical. But part of my journey is also remembering my inner nature, remembering what it was like for me to be a child and not be in my head, and just like look at the butterflies fluttering and seeing the dragonflies and just watching the birds and slowing down. And that's been a huge part of my journey in my adult life. If I go back into my story, because I know that's part of what we're talking about here, is my story that's led me into what I do. As a child, I was surrounded by caregivers. So, and we grew up very religious too. So I grew up with a lot of these paradigms of, you know, men are the man of the house, you know, the head of the house. Women, we cater to them. We take care of the family, the home, you know, that's our duty. And it's very interesting because the other big part of my journey, I think, in this life is learning trust. Mm-hmm. And there is this thing, when I was a child, I was so trusting. And I wanted to trust what all the adults said to me. I wanted to trust and believe in God. And what I was told was quote unquote truth from the religion that my family, you know, practiced, which was just Protestant Christian, Baptist Christian. And so, and I also grew up as the oldest of 3 kids, the only girl. I was the first one to go to college out of my family right out of high school. So there was like from the moment I was born, it's like my parents were very young. They were 17 when they had me, so they had to drop out of college. So the moment I conceived as like, she's going to college. She's going to be successful. She's going to do all this great thing. She's going to do all the things that we never got to do because we got pregnant. And so it's like, before I was even born, there was just like all this on me that I was the good girl, and I wasn't going to make the same mistakes as my parents, and I was going to carry on this different legacy and go to college and do this and do that. And I never stood a chance. I came in this world a people pleaser. I came in this world like, yes, I'm going to make you guys happy. I'm going to do everything that you guys say, and I'm going to trust everything you tell me. And I'm never going to question you because I love you and I want to make you proud of me. And so that was my childhood, was being a people pleaser, being a perfectionist, and being told by everyone that I wasn't perfect, I wasn't good enough. And I think because I had ADD that was undiagnosed, I had to put out a lot of effort to do well at school. I had to put a lot of effort to memorize things. Things came very inherently to me, but in the structure of school and the structure of the way everyone wanted me to learn, it was really hard. But there was things that I was like brilliant at. There was things that I was really, really good at, and they didn't really know what to do with me in school. And they would sometimes put me in other classes that were more advanced, but then I didn't have support in there. And so that I'm just sitting there like trying to be a perfectionist and trying to do well and not feeling supported in any way. And so a big part of my journey is also just being able to learn how to advocate for my needs, because being a people pleaser as a child, you learn very quickly, you don't advocate for your needs. Your job is to meet the needs of everyone around you. And I learned that a lot from my grandma. My uncle was a quadriplegic. He got hit by a car when he was on his motorcycle. And so he was a quadriplegic, and that happened when I was 2. So my whole life, I watched her take care of him, mom taking care of son. And I also watched her take care of elderly people in her life, including her mom, my great-grandma. My great-grandma actually died in my arms at the age of 9 because I was also taking care of her. So at the age of 9, I was already keeping people alive. Not only was I taking care of my little brother when I was home, but when I was with her, I was taking care of this, 88, 89-year-old woman. I was, helping and dump out her urinal. I was giving her suppositories and cleaning her up. I was smashing up her pills and mixing it into food, like baby food for her to eat, and spoon feed her. And we would have to restrain her because she had a stroke and she would fight back. And so I remember having to restrain her and tie her arms to the railings of the bed so we could take care of her, and just soothing her and talking to her. And she would because she had a stroke, she wasn't coherent, right? But at 9 years old, I'm learning how to be a nurse. Wow. I remember helping her home nurse come in, and I would help her put the IVs in her arms. Yeah, tie up and put the little rubber band. It was just crazy what I was doing by 9 years old. By 9 years old, I had already inherited, this is my role. My role is to take care of people. And so as I become a teenager and, things got kind of tough at home. I don't want to go into a lot of details about it, but, my parents, did end up losing one of their houses. And there is this time where I moved halfway into 3rd grade. And I'm mentioning this because this is another part of my journey is of not only the trust, but feeling secure. So there were a couple times in my life, and my parents probably had no clue that this was going to be the impact of it. But, they did lose their house, and we moved to another town, which my parents thought was going to have more economic opportunity for them. And so we moved, but I didn't have any warning. So I would go to my grandma's house for Christmas break, and I'm assuming my parents are probably really stressed out. They're losing their house. They're having to pack things up. So it makes sense that they just not allow the kids to pick up on the stress. And so we go to grandma's house, and the next thing I know, I'm getting picked up to go back to school. And instead of going to our home, we're driving past our home in San Bernardino, and we're going to the small desert town called Apple Valley, which was about 30 minutes away from where I grew up at that point in San Bernardino. And we're in a new home. And all of a sudden I'm in a new school. I never got a chance to say goodbye to my teachers. I never got a chance to say goodbye to my 2 friends. Not that I had a lot of friends, because I was kind of socially awkward, and I didn't know how to make friends. So I was very quiet. So it's my friends were the other kids who were also socially awkward, who didn't talk. We used to just sit there and be quiet and people watch people and not really say anything to each other. And so it's kind of funny, we were friends, but we were just very socially awkward. So, But it was one of those things that I never got to say goodbye to them. And so like there's a couple moments like that in my childhood where I had just things ripped out from underneath me. And, I was probably picking up on my parents' energy too, even though they were trying to protect me from that. But I did have a lot of feelings of lack of security, lack of foundation. And so now I'm in this new place, a new home, and starting over. And it was not a good place for economic growth for my parents. And there were a lot of situations that actually ended up preventing my dad from being able to work. And he was a construction worker, so he made really good money when he did work. But at that point, he couldn't work anymore. And here my mom is someone who dropped out of college, trying to go out and work in a small town that really didn't have much economy. And so throughout my teenage years, we didn't have a lot of money. We were very low income. And so it was interesting for me growing up, and I got teased a lot and I got put down a lot because it was very evident. I didn't get to wear the nice clothes. I didn't get to wear like name brand stuff. I got a lot of hand-me-downs, and my parents were also very strict because they didn't have parents. Both of them came from broken homes, and they were basically on their own from 12 on. So 12 years old, they're taking care of themselves, living on their own, doing their own thing. Both my parents, yeah. Yeah, from the age of 12 on, they're basically on their own, doing their own thing. Well, this is in the 70s and 80s, though, This is the 70s, right? Late 70s, early 80s. So my parents are rock and rollers, like I think I went to multiple Rush concerts in my mom's belly. It's funny. I don't know if people who are listening may not know Rush, but Geddy Lee, the singer of Rush, has this very unique voice, and you either love it or you hate it. And I love his voice. His voice is so soothing to me. Like I feel like I'm being rocked when I hear his voice. It's like, yeah, it's because I went to concerts. I went to Rush concerts in my mama's belly. So, my parents were very strict. I wasn't allowed to wear makeup. I wasn't allowed to cut my hair. I wasn't allowed to wear showy clothes. Like it was very much like I had to be a good girl, and so part of my journey has been trying to feel safe, trying to feel accepted for who I am, finding my authentic self, and allowing my expression. Because, I also came, I'm of a lot of German family, and there's just something about Germans, man. They're like, children should not be seen, or children should be seen and not heard. You don't talk back to authority, at all. Like you don't question authority. You don't talk back to adults, like it's because I said so. And so, it was very interesting because a lot of times my parents were very lax and let us do what we wanted, but there were certain things that was like, no. And it was like, okay, you don't go against that. You don't question it. It's like the fear of life, like you fear your life, like saying no to your parents. And so it's just like very interesting having rock and roll young parents who are like so hip, and we're like so close in age. So even now as adults, I just love getting, like my parents and I get along so well because we don't have a big generational gap, right? But like I remember just growing up and like my parents just wanting the best for me, but everything that they did in a way very much restricted my authentic expression and made me feel ashamed for being a woman, made me feel ashamed to embrace what it meant to be sexy or beautiful or enhance my features. And there's some things that I super appreciate. Like I love the fact, I hated it at the time, but I love that my dad didn't let me wear makeup as a kid because I don't wear makeup now as an adult. I went through this phase of where I was like, yes, I want to wear makeup because I was told I couldn't wear makeup. But when it really dawned on me, I was like, I actually really like what my dad taught me, that I don't need to wear makeup to be beautiful. I don't need to mask myself. I can use makeup every now and then to enhance my features, but I don't have to wear makeup. And I so appreciate that because I sometimes run into women who just can't leave the house without makeup on. And I'm like, oh, okay. And like that's great. That's their journey. But for me, it's like such an appreciation that wasn't part of my programming growing up. That my programming was that, no, you're beautiful because you're natural, and you're beautiful because this is the way God made you. Yeah. And even though I shunned religion and God for a long time, I have now circled back to God from a spiritual perspective. So yes, this is the way God made me. And I love and accept myself just the way that I am, even though I may not be perfect. And that's been a big thing on my Virgo journey too, is releasing perfectionism. Mm-hmm. And so some of the ways that I was able to release that, I want to kind of start going into the modalities and my journey into adulthood and how I've supported all this stuff, the scarcity mindsets, the fear of expression, the fear of judgment, the fear of what are people going to think about me? What if I make a mistake? You know, and as a child, I always wanted to be a teacher, or I wanted to be in the medical field. So it's kind of funny that as an adult, I became a teacher, but not a conventional teacher. And I work with medicine, but not conventional medicine. So it's kind of funny because even as a child, I had these wishes. And then as I become an adult, I'm realizing I don't fit into the box of being a teacher or being in the medical field. And so I found ways of embracing both of these natures within me through all these modalities that I discovered to help my spiritual growth and to help me with specifically emotional regulation. Because when you have ADD or ADHD, I don't have the hyperactivity, but our emotions are very intense. Our emotions just come so big, and it's like we're more sensitive. It's like our sensitivity is just a little heightened. And so when we experience an emotion, it's a little harder for us to regulate it. And so people who have known me for like 10, 20 years, they know how these modalities have worked for me because they've seen the shifts in me of going from this young but very strong, resilient girl, but who was afraid, but very courageous. Like I had so many fears, but for some reason, I always had this courage to somehow move through them. You know, I'm kind of jumping around a little bit, but down to even, I had to run away to move up here to go to Humboldt. And my parents disowned me. Wow. For me, and with me making the decision to move up because my parents didn't support my decision to come up here. And there was like my journey of intuition, of trust, right? Coming back to the idea of trust, of like, I went through my youth trusting the adults and then realizing that so much of what was told to me was lies, down to like history, down to what I was learning in school, down to religion, down to what my parents were telling me. And I'm just like, who can I trust? And so I think that was the moment when I decided to move to Humboldt County, was the first time I trusted myself and I trusted my gut. Yeah. I came up here and I visited and I fell in love with the place. By this time, my parents lost their second house, actually, by the way. So I was 16 years old. My parents lost their house, and then they had to move. They decided to move to Vegas because there was way more economic. They're like, okay, Vegas is where we're going. That's where the economic opportunity is. Sure enough, my parents found their home. They found their place where they could thrive, and it was Las Vegas. But for me, I'm 16 years old. I'm like, I'm not going to Vegas. You can't go to Vegas. I'm like, I'm going up north. My dad's all, you're not going up north. You're coming to Vegas. I'm like, no, I'm not. See you later. So I technically had to run away in a way to come here, even though I was so close to 18. I was 17 when I moved up here. My parents moved to Vegas 16. So for my senior year of high school, I actually wasn't living with my parents. And then they expected me to follow them when I graduated high school. So that was that was my way out, was because my parents weren't actually with me. Mm-hmm. And so I was able to get that plane ticket, and like behind their back, I just moved up here, even though I was 17 and I wasn't quite 18 yet, because I trusted my gut. My gut told me this is where I'm supposed to go. And I had to deal with abandonment, being disowned for the choice that I made for trusting myself. Mm-hmm. And so that was a hard year, my first year being up here on my own, going to college and not having support from my parents. I paid for school. I worked 35 hours a week, went to school full time, and I just worked my ass off, and I just did it on my own. And that was a real hard thing for me to go through, but it was something that really built a lot of strength and resiliency. And I did mend my relationship with my parents, and I have an amazing relationship with my parents, which is really, really incredible. And so there's no more hard feelings about that process, because to me, once again, the spiritual awakening, I'm not going to blame my parents or shame my parents, because they were doing what they thought was best, being parents, wanting to keep their family together. It was really, really important for both my parents, who came from broken homes and who lost their parental guidance before they were even teenagers, that they got to maintain that role of being a parent for their kids.
That makes sense.
Right. And so for me, I realized, like, okay, this is just their projections. This was their wants and desires. This is what they're holding on to. This is their attachments. My lesson to them was learning how to let go. Right. So I was the first thing that they had to learn how to let go, and they had to watch me fly. And years later, they love to see the bird that I've turned into. They love to see the phoenix that I've become, even if they don't understand me, even if I'm considered the quote unquote black sheep of the family, right? Because I'm the hippie. I'm the hippie who makes no sense to my family. And that's okay. They love me for it. They love me even more for it now, right? And now they do come to me for these questions, you know, like, when they're having health stuff or nutrition questions, and yeah, they're getting stuff from their doctors, but they're coming to me and they're comparing that, and they're trusting me more and more and more, right? Which is really beautiful. And so I know that they're so proud of me, even though my whole life I felt like nothing I was ever doing, I was making my parents proud. And so, but once again, part of my journey was also realizing that what I needed from everyone else around me, including my parents, I had to give myself. I had to see within myself, that they were only mirrors and reflecting back what I saw of myself. Right. And so when I started accepting myself, my parents started to accept me for everything that I did. Whereas before I accepted myself, I kept feeling like my parents weren't accepting me. That wasn't true. That was my own projections. My parents totally accepted me for who I was. Right. And so that was like that's a big part of all the work that I do, all the work that I've learned over the years, starting with herbalism. So now I'm going to circle back. I know you guys have to bear with my ADD brain here. I jump around a lot. So, you know, I got disowned. I come up here. I'm lost. I'm confused. I don't know what I want to do with my life. I'm like, I want to be a teacher. I go into the teaching program. I'm like, you know what? I don't like kids at that time in my life. I didn't like kids. I wanted to teach special ed because I had this connection to neurodivergence. And I didn't know I had ADD at the time. I didn't realize that I was neurodivergent. I just knew that when I was in high school, I stuck up for all the kids. I befriended them. I ate lunch with all the kids with different neurodiversity, and I would see them get bullied and I would stand up against these bullies. So there was just like this inner calling of like, I'm an advocate for this population. And funny enough, as an adult, I've continued to be an advocate for that population, including for my child who's ADHD.
This class has come to you where you're teaching,
and now I teach adults with different abilities. Yes, it's just this. I know
that came to you.
That came to me through here. Yes, I know. And this is what I'm just like. When I look back at my life, that I see all these things that I was connected to as a child, and see how that the universe, that when I'm open and I surrender into the possibilities of the universe just hands it to me on a freaking, like, not even a silver platter. It's like a gold platter. I'm like, yes, bring it, bring it. Thank you, universe. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And so, yes. And that's like, so I just like loved working with the neurodivergent population. But when I started studying like teaching in college, it was like very much geared towards child development. I'm like, this is not why I wanted to teach, or like, I'm not trying to teach and learn child development. So at that time in my life, I realized, okay, this isn't for me. And so I ended up taking an herbalism class. That's my second semester of college. And boom, that was it. That I left that first. I took 1 hour sitting down, learning about herbs for me to be like, this is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. I found it. And I walked out of that classroom and I'm like, okay, I'm a freshman in college. I got to get out of college because there's no one going to college in my family, right? Like I couldn't just go and be an herbalist. I'm like, oh my God, I still have to go to college because this is what I meant to do. Because I was born with that programming. I have to go to college. So I'm like, okay, I got to get out of college and I got to go study herbalism. How do I do this? I'm like, okay, Candice, go get a business degree because you can do anything with a business degree. You'll make your parents proud with a business degree. So I do. I go get myself a business degree. Meanwhile, I'm studying herbalism. every year I'm in college from that moment on, every day I devoted myself to plant spirit medicine and plant medicine and learning herbs. And I came to the perfect place because here I am in Humboldt, surrounded by diversity. So I just go out and I study and I learn and I play and I play and I play and I play and I play. And I just kept playing with plants and making things and sharing and learning so much along the way. And I immersed myself and I created a business. And then it was like, okay, well, I'm studying business. We've got this ADD brain. I'm also a manifesting generator. I didn't know it at the time, but since I'm talking about my journey, I love weaving in human design. And so I'm a manifesting generator. So technically I have all this energy and all these ideas. It's just boom, 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 boom. Okay. But how do I get it out there? Like I have all this in here, but the implementation was what was always hard for me, but I did it. So I learned how to create my own labels and I learned how to do this. So I learned how to do that. And so the last 15 years of my life has been learning how to market myself and be seen and heard and put the medicine out there, right? And so that's been its own journey in itself. And that brought up so much stuff for me along the way because I had all these opportunities just kind of thrown at me that I felt like I wasn't ready for. But I'm like, that would be really great if I did that, like teaching, like the way teaching got thrown at me. So after I got out of college, I studied an intensive herbalism program through Krista Sinadinos, the Northwest School of Botanical Studies, local program. Fabulous, amazing. I did 3 programs with her. I did that. I did her advanced clinical program, or I did her clinical program and then her advanced material medical program. So for a whole year, I'm studying under a mentor and teacher and just getting so much depth of how to work with herbs synergistically with people, how to look at, I learned anatomy and physiology in depth. I learned about the inner workings of the human body. And, but along the way, she introduced me to plant spirit medicine in a container, because I didn't realize I was doing it. I had been doing plant spirit medicine my whole life, but I didn't know what I was doing. So to actually have it talked about and presented to me, I was like, oh yeah, these plants actually have spirits to them. And each plant, they have different spirits and different qualities and different energies, and you can connect to them and you gain wisdom from them. And all of a sudden I was like, holy shit, I was actually hearing plants talking to me as a kid. I wasn't just crazy. And it was all these little aha moments of I've been hearing plants talk to me my whole life. It's just, I grew up in the desert. And so I didn't have a lot of plant diversity, but when I would go out, the cacti and succulents would talk to me. The trees would talk to me. The grass would talk to me. And I didn't realize it, and it's just this thing of I had this connection to spirits and I didn't realize it. But at the same time, there are certain things that were normalized in my family. My dad was the first one who taught me about energy. He would take a deck of cards and he would hold a card and then he'd mix it up in the deck and he'd spread it out. He's like, okay, put your hands over and find the card that has my energy. And sure enough, I'd go through and I'd find the card that had his energy. So it was amazing because for I had to actually hide the fact that I'm Wiccan and pagan, to my dad, because that would be totally taboo, right? But for somebody who was so Christian and seems so disconnected from this idea of spirits, my dad's so freaking connected. He's so tuned in. He just doesn't realize it, right? And so my dad was my first energy teacher. And so little things like that, where things were normalized, that I realized, okay, this is really cool. But because I didn't have the terminology, I didn't have the spiritual awareness, because I grew up so religious. So my mind and thinking was so much in the religious context. It was eye-opening for me when I came to Humboldt and I saw and I got to experience crystal medicine. Oh yes, of course. I've always felt energy coming out of rocks and stones. It is electromagnetic pulses, So it's I started to learn the science behind the spiritual quantum of what I had been experiencing, but I had no words to explain, right? And then I started to realize the deeper I went with it, the less normal I felt. The more normal I felt, the less normal I felt in society, right? So it's just kind of interesting. But yeah, my parents were still my dad in particular was still my first energy teacher. Wow. So it's just so funny, right? And so here I am now as an adult, and I'm learning about plant spirit medicine while I'm learning about herbalism, because to me they're very different. and I'm learning about nutrition, I'm learning anatomy, I'm learning physiology, I'm learning clinical application, and it's just like amazing. I'm like, I'm in my element. I'm like, yes, I get to use my brain, I get to use my heart, I get to use my spirit, I get to talk to people, I get to help people, I get to see the big picture of the health, and I get to help you with all the details, and I get to help you with figuring out what works for you and what doesn't work for you. And it was just amazing. But I did have some hiccups along the way, and a big part of it was my worth. How do I value my worth as an herbalist, as a healer? And having these mixed messages of seeing the medical community being able to charge what they charge and have insurance covered for it, people being able to go and get these services for free because they're covered by insurance. And yet when they want to come to an herbalist or a nutritionalist, or even now that I do tapping, a tapper, or, it's like, I can't give you that much money for that. Especially here in Humboldt County. So here I am, like, recognizing my gifts, but being told that I'm not worthy of being paid. I'm not worthy of having an income. I'm not worthy of having a roof over my head because you don't want to pay me for what I know. But I've spent thousands of dollars and years of my life studying, and not just studying, but practicing and living and experiencing. And so for me as an herbalist, I really struggled. And I worked at a local herb store, which gave me the most fantastic experience of working with not just hundreds, but thousands of people in the 5 years that I worked there, right? But that's where the opportunities really came for me, working there, because all of a sudden I got called into teaching. You're great, you're passionate, you talk, and I had the energy, right? Because being a manifesting generator, I had the energy, and I'm personable, and but I had fear of public speaking. I had fears of, I don't speak very well. I had speech when I was a kid, and there's certain sounds that I just don't say correctly, or I'll sometimes use words interchangeably that sound similar, but they're different words, right? And I've had very critical people in my life who have corrected me a lot. But I'm also the most critical person in my life. And so when I get corrected, not only am I feeling criticism from another person, but I'm going to give myself 10 times that criticism. And now I'm going to feel shamed, and I'm going to be embarrassed. I might start crying, and I'm going to feel all red. And this would happen to me when I'd be teaching sometimes, so a big part of my journey was learning how to get over that fear of public speaking, learning how to tap into that inner courage and just trust that, hey, I'm being called and guided into this. Somebody is telling me I'm good at this and that I should do this. And so I just took almost every invitation that came my way, and to the point where I overcommitted. But that was the other part of my journey, was learning boundaries, learning how to say no, learning how to say no to other people, and learn how to say yes to myself. Right. And so as I'm being called into doing all these things, because I'm creative and I have this abundant energy and I'm personable and I'm like very passionate and excitable, and people like to listen to me, even though I say fucked up things and like I say things incorrectly and I stumble over my words, and it's just like, and I'm very animated, so I'm always talking with my hands, and people are just probably like very turned off by me sometimes. And I get that. Sometimes I get the energy of like, people either love me or hate me, and that's okay, because that was a big part of my journey too. Is like, okay, well, if there's billions of people on the planet, so it's okay if maybe just 1% of these billions of people like me. And if I'm in a room with 100%, if 1% likes me, that's great, it's awesome, So like I had to change my perspective of like, that people pleasing is like, I don't have to please everybody. Not everyone has to like me. Right. But if I'm in a room of 100 people, if I'm having a conversation, there's a handful of people who are like resonating with what I'm saying, and I get to inspire them in some way, or I get to give them a piece of information that they didn't know, that they can change their life. Holy shit. That's amazing. I'm doing something awesome with the gifts that I have, and the knowledge that I have, and the wisdom that I've acquired. Right. And so now it took me 20 years to get there, though. It took me 20 years of working through these fears and these anxieties. And so going back to where it was 20 years ago, I want to talk a little bit more of the modalities that I've learned along the way, but I just want to share, so 20 years ago, not only did I have high anxiety, but I also struggled with OCD and obsessive compulsive disorder, which is very much connected to anxiety. I mean, if you have OCD, you have anxiety. Because basically what happens is your brain doesn't feel safe. Your nervous system doesn't feel safe when you have OCD. And so you are in a hypervigilant state of trying to control everything around you because you've had situations that you have not been able to control, right? And so when I moved up here, fears, anxieties, lots of courage and lots of bravery. I moved up here on my own, right? With nothing. Worked my ass off, paid for college, paid for everything that I do. And, you know, so like honoring just these dualities of me, but like the anxiety and the OCD was so hard because I was a germaphobe and I had this fear, like irrational fears, like spiders. We were talking about this earlier. Like, I had this irrational fear of spiders. And it was just like, I felt like I was always on edge, always overlooking my shoulder, always expecting something bad to happen. And sometimes bad things did happen. And because I was hypervigilant, I can get myself out. So it was like such a protective mechanism for me. But in many ways, it didn't serve me because my heart was always racing and I couldn't calm down. And I was just like going. And I learned that from my grandma too. I like to joke around like she's like a chicken who runs around with her head cut off. Because yeah, the woman does 1,000 things in a day, and then she's super proud that she does 1,000 things in a day, and then she puts other people down because they don't get as much stuff done as her in a day. And it's just like, okay, yes, you're type A. Yes, you get a lot of stuff done. Woohoo, amazing. And I inherited that, and I felt like that was my worth. If I didn't get 1,000 things done in a day, like my 70-year-old grandma, and I'm 35 years old, there must be something wrong with me, right? And so it's like, what I learned was I'm actually a type B personality who was raised to be type A. So I was completely going against my nature. And I had this OCD and I had this high anxiety and I had all this energy. And it's not like hyperactivity, but it's just like I always had to just keep moving and doing things, just doing and learning. And when I finished one thing, it's like, okay, what's next to learn? And so it's just like constant projects. Like I just do a lot, right?
Also tied to self-worth.
Yes.
That you have to do something in order to be worthy.
Yes. So there was no slowing down for me. And so part of the modalities I had to learn along the way through college and through motherhood, which I haven't even talked about yet, has been learning these tools and ways of slowing down, not only just slowing down the mind and regulating focus so I can manage my ADD better, but regulating my nervous system and allowing myself to feel safe so I could actually regulate the OCD. And the OCD would ebb and flow. And after I had my son, he's 10 years old now. So I've also had this 10-year journey of motherhood and what I've explored along the way. But the anxiety and the lack of feeling safe actually also triggered Hashimoto's. And Hashimoto's is a autoimmune condition where your immune system actually starts attacking your thyroid, and it affects your whole endocrine system, affects your hormones, affected my cycle, affected my energy levels. It gave me severe brain fog. It just affected all these things. But the Hashimoto's was so connected to the OCD to me, is when you look up both of them and you look at the nature of them, they very much come rooted into not feeling safe, right? And so I've spent a good chunk of my life not feeling safe. Now, to highlight the astrology part of that, when you look into astrology, the north and south nodes of the moon have to do with the energy you bring into the world and the energy that you're supposed to be moving into, right, as your journey. So the energy I came into the world was the south node of Scorpio, and Scorpio is about not feeling safe. That Scorpio energy is like, yeah. So I came into this world of that's my default. That's my comfort zone, is going into not feeling safe, which is interesting because you think that it's not comfortable not being safe. But when you come into the world with that being your part of your journey, that is actually like not feeling safe ends up becoming your default mechanism. Right. And so it's like you end up putting yourself in situations where you don't necessarily feel safe because that is your default comfort. But your journey is to move out of that. And for me, it's the north node into Taurus. And so then it's about moving into self-worth, earthly abundances, material items, connection to nature. And it's funny because I've studied astrology for a long time, but I haven't studied it in depth except for the last 3 to 4 years. 3 to 4 years, I've really been studying in depth, and I've been looking into beyond the star rising and moon, right? So when I started looking into the north and south nodes, it all made sense to me. I was like, holy fucking shit, yes, my whole life has been, how do I feel safe in this world? How do I feel safe being seen? How do I feel safe expressing myself? How do I accept myself? Moving into that Taurus energy, how do I value my worth? Right? How do I know my worth? And so we just had good 18 months because the nodes change every 18 months. So now we're in that Aries Libra picture. But for the last 18 months, fucking rocked my world. Going into the 18 months of Scorpio South and Taurus North, these 18 months have been the most transformative months of my life. Of finally moving out of Scorpio and finally creating the environment where I'm like, okay, I know my worth. Wow. I feel safe. I accept my body. I accept who I am. And I feel safe being who I am. I feel safe expressing myself. I feel safe doing podcasts like this, and so it's just beautiful. It's beautiful when you can look at something like astrology or human design, and you can kind of look at your life and you can just kind of be like, look, this is like just this beautiful roadmap that I'm on. And I can just ride through this and take the lessons and take the growth and spiral up. And so I come back to this. I know I've been going all over the place, but like, to me, this is astrology. Like as we kind of follow astrology or we honor our human design and we're going with these cycles and we're going with the waves, like every solar return, mine's coming up next week, by the way, it's my birthday, I'm a Virgo. And so, like every solar return, when we do the work, we go through the moon cycles, we go through that calendar zodiac, we're spiraling up and we're spiraling up. And that's that spiritual awakening. And yeah, we have hiccups and we have things that may make us feel like we're spiraling down. But if it's part of the journey, we're really only continuing to spiral up, right? And so it's all perspective. Yeah. And so the tools that I've used along the way, besides herbalism, because I've talked about that. So my journey started with herbalism, plant spirit medicine. That took me down the road of nutrition as well, because to me, they go hand in hand. When you really start going into the depths of herbalism, you go into the depths of nutrition too, because plants are micronutrients. And so I studied a lot of nutrition. And over the years, once I got that Hashimoto's, I realized that there was something missing. So I did pretty well supporting myself as an herbalist, supporting myself with food and diet, positive mindset. But there was still stuff that was missing still by the time I'm like 30 years old and I have a kid and I'm dealing with Hashimoto's. Oh, I also had Lyme disease. I didn't mention that. So I had Lyme disease in my 20s. That was interesting. And I also had a big journey of being gaslit by doctors. So being 20 years old, going in and saying, I have all this pain and I have this and I have that. And they just thought I was there for pills, which I don't take. So I stood there, I'm like, I don't take pills. I'm like, I would tell them, I was like, you could write me a prescription for that. And you could go check at the pharmacy 3 months later and it would still be there because I'm not here for that. I just want to know what's wrong so I can support myself. And so I had a lot of gaslighting because I started going to the doctor at 18 dealing with chronic pain and trying to figure out, like, why am I feeling this way? And so I've had like this ebb and flow. So by the time I'm in my 30s and I have Hashimoto's and I've gone to 3 doctors and they just told me, oh, you just need to go on birth control because I bled for 2 years after I had Mackay. So you're only supposed to have up to 6 months of postpartum bleeding. Mine continued for 2 years. So there was definitely something that was out of balance. So a big part of my journey is womb healing too, which when you look at human design, for me as a manifesting generator, my auric weakness though is the sacral chakra. So it's like, when I found that, I was like, oh shit, of course, that makes sense because my womb freaking takes it all in. Everything in my environment, when I don't feel safe, it affects my womb and affects my lower back. And that's like, duh, Of course I have Hashimoto's when I'm not feeling safe in my relationship, when I'm not feeling safe and secure being a mom, when I'm not feeling safe and secure, like, because I was a very independent person. Like I went from moving out at 16, running away and coming up here on my own, working through college, being very independent. Even though I had a boyfriend in college and I lived with him, I was still so independent, right? And then here I met this other guy and we have a kid together. And all of a sudden I'm like, oh, I have to be a stay-at-home mom. I'm not supporting myself and I have to rely on someone else to support me. Well, I hadn't relied on anyone supporting me since I was 15, 16 years old. And at that point, it was scarcity. And so here, all of a sudden, my partner, you know, my father's, my son's father, he didn't make a lot of money either, being here in Humboldt County. So all of a sudden, I'm deciding to have this child, even though I promised myself that I wasn't going to have a child unless I could financially support them and feel secure. We had that talk, and he reassured me that everything would be okay and he would prioritize our finances and he would honor that fear, and he didn't do it, and he betrayed me. And he betrayed me in so many ways, which I'm not going to get into because that's not what this is about. But like a big part of my worth is I had to learn that I was attracting people in my life that weren't valuing me because I didn't value myself, right? They didn't think I was worthy because I wasn't worthy. I didn't feel like I was. And so here I had this 13, 14-year long relationship with him. And it was just last year that we finally separated. And it was weird because it was years and years and years of me not feeling safe, me not feeling secure, me feeling betrayed, trying to work it out with him, trying to compromise. And the whole time, all the modalities that I did and I learned. So the plant spirits were telling me, you know, what I needed, which was to be with a partner who valued me. And I couldn't listen and I couldn't hear it because I couldn't handle the shame of failing in my relationship because it was so important to my dad to not fail with my mom. And my mom and dad had a very rocky relationship at times, but they always grew and they grew together, but they had also been together since 16 or whatever, right? And so they've been together their whole life. But I grew up, I mean, my whole adult life, I've heard my dad say, like, every person I know is divorced. Your mom and I are the only people who are still together. You know, and so for me, I couldn't listen to what spirit was telling me because I couldn't fail. Because that perfectionist came in and that people pleaser came in. And it was like, and for years and years and years, I was not trusting myself. I was not trusting my intuition. And that only held me back as a healer. So here I am sharing my gifts, being a teacher. I not only teaching herbalism at this point, because I got thrown into that from Humboldt Herbals. And I continued that even after having my kid. Oh, I have to say something about that too before I circle back. I actually ended up teaching and creating a 10-week program at HSU. It's called Cal Poly now. I still call it HSU, blah, blah, blah. But that was the first class I took. So remember when I took my first herbalism class at HSU, it was at HSU through the CCAP program. It was taught by another teacher. But after I graduated HSU and I studied herbalism, I circled back and I start teaching that class. And I expanded it from 8 weeks to 10 weeks. And I made it and I created this whole book and a curriculum. And it was an amazing experience. And I absolutely loved it. And so that was like my big teaching, right? And that's where I like started writing and doing herbal monographs, and I started writing for Humboldt Herbals. And so here I am tapping into this idea of writing. I never thought I was a good writer. And all of a sudden everyone's telling me, you're a great writer. And I'm like, what, are you serious? I'm like, my grammar's horrible. I barely spell. Like, I ramble. I'm so verbose. Because that's my Virgo nature. I'm verbose, right? We like use 100 times the amount of words that we really need to be saying to say anything. So it's just kind of fun. Like, so all of a sudden I'm like being told like, you're a great writer and and I'm like, are you serious? I'm like, okay. So I just kind of keep doing these things, right? But at the same time, I'm beating myself up and I'm being told in my relationship that I'm not worthy. And he was kind of on board with what I did, but it was more from this disconnected state. So I would convince myself, he supports me. He's supporting me. He loves what I do. He's all about it. And it took me a long time to figure it out. I was like, you know, he actually really doesn't support what you're doing. He's supporting the fact that you're actually into something and you're leaving him alone. And he wants to do this whole separate thing because he's not in it with you. And so I just kind of, in a way, kept lying to myself and not saying the truth. So I wasn't trusting. right? Because of the shame, and because the perfectionism, and because the not feeling safe, and the OCD, and just like all these things, and the anxiety would kick in, right? And so over the years of this journey, the things that did help me outside of herbalism and plant medicine and just energy healing in general was fermentation. Actually, fermentation was like the next little puzzle piece that came in for me. And I was like, oh, and that was interesting because indirectly, as I started learning fermentation, what ended up happening was my OCD started diminishing and becoming managed, and my anxiety subsided significantly. And it dawned on me, I was like, oh, I wonder if I had PANDAS, which is an acronym. I don't remember what the acronym stands for, but it's a condition that is triggered in childhood. Sometimes that when children get a certain strain of strep, the strep, the bacteria actually in our bodies affect our epigenetics. So the way our genes are expressed actually has to do with the bacteria and the microbiome in our body, right? Which is so fascinating. And so what I discovered through learning fermentation, because when I learned about fermentation, I'm a certified fermentationist. So I went through the whole curriculum of like learning the science behind fermentation, not just learning how to make ferments, but learning how they're made, what's going on as they're fermenting, like what are the bacteria doing, what's all that going on. And then the other part of my studies was learning how to use them for medicine. So what conditions do you use certain ferments on? What conditions do you avoid ferments on? Like you don't do fermentation when you have high inflammation, so if you have hives, you don't take ferments. The ferments are going to increase hives or increase an autoimmune condition. So it's like I learned all those nuances of how to use fermentation, but what I found was just immersing myself and making ferments all the time and getting my hands in there, right? And like eating it. My OCD just started diminishing. It dawned on me. I was like, oh, the healthy bacteria that I'm bringing in my body and restoring my microbiome, all of that, along with my positive mindset and the nutrition, because the nutrition feeds the healthy microbiome, this is actually allowing my genes to express healthy. So it's actually turning off the genes that are activating my OCD. And it was just fascinating for me because I wasn't using fermentation for that. That was a side benefit that happened. And then all of a sudden I'm losing weight and my Hashimoto symptoms are going away. And all of a sudden, like my Hashimoto's is like cured up too. Not like cured, but like subsided and managed. And I'm like, oh, this is amazing. Okay. And so, right. And like, of course, I just study one thing right after another. So I finished my fermentation program and I'm like, what's next? Look at my email because I follow so many different things. Right. So I'm always like, like I get this email and I keep seeing this thing about tapping. And I kind of ignored it. I ignored it for a couple of years. I kept seeing this thing coming up about tapping. And at this time, so this was about 7 years ago. I get called all of a sudden into teaching Tai Chi and QiGong. So that's another thing that just got handed to me on a golden platter. It's like, so my teacher who I've been studying with since I moved up here, she retired and she had such a strong following and community and they didn't want to stop practicing. So she kind of like nudged me. She's like, hey, you're such a great teacher. I think you would be great. She says, it's going to be hard for you at first and you're going to have to learn a lot and there's going to be a learning curve for you, but I think that you can do it. And I was like, are you sure? Because at this point I had taken years off, right? Because I became a mom, so I was doing it with her when I was pregnant, 6 months pregnant, doing like Tai Chi kicks and stuff like that. It was so much fun. But it was interesting being 6 months and like figuring out the balance of doing Tai Chi. But then I had taken 3 to 4 years off. And then all of a sudden I'm coming back because I hear that she's retiring. I'm like, holy crap, I gotta go and get my time with Monkey before she's done. And as I come back, she's like, you should take over. I'm like, what are you talking about? I haven't been doing this for 4 years. She's like, you're gonna be fine. And so I trusted. Once again, learning to trust, right? Okay, this woman's telling me I can do this. Okay. I need a change in my life. And I love Tai Chi and QiGong. Maybe I can do this. And so I did, and holy shit, that was a fucking learning lesson. Because what I realized, I was like, I'm really good at teaching with plants in front of me because I get to hide behind the plants and they're doing all the work for me, you know? We're playing with medicine. I'm behind these jars and behind a table. All of a sudden, Tai Chi, I'm like, and I'm not very comfortable with my body at this point in my life, right? Like I'm comfortable, but not fully accepting of who I am and how I move and how I carry myself. And I had some critical stuff because they would sit there like, Candice, you're not doing that right. Candice, you're not doing that. Candice, you did this. And I'm like, and so here I am stumbling over my words. I'm saying right instead of left and left instead of right. And I'm just like, right. But it was such a good learning experience for me to just tap into humility, learn how to call myself out and just be okay making mistakes. So that was my journey of learning how to teach Tai Chi and Qigong, was being okay making mistakes and just calling myself out like, oh guys, my brain's a little scrambled. I don't know from my left from my right. It's okay. Let's just keep going, you know? And I just like make fun of myself in a way. And I just like, and everyone just kind of smiles and laughs and we just carry on. And people started to figure out, once I learned I had ADD, I just kind of ended up like, sorry guys, my ADD brain. And so I think a lot of people just have compassion for me when I make these mistakes, because I have compassion for myself when I make these mistakes, right? When I didn't have compassion for myself, all I felt was the criticism, right? Once I started getting past that and I started just feeling compassion for myself and feeling humor for myself and just joy for myself, even in these moments of mistakes, all of a sudden, that's all I feel for my students. I no longer feel the criticism. Right. So like, once again, I just had to learn like, what everyone is mirroring back at me is really how I feel about myself. And that's just been like fed to me as I've gone through these shifts of just shifting inside myself and just seeing that me being mirrored back at me. And I'm like, oh my God, this is just so cool. And so as I'm learning Tai Chi and Qi, or learning how to teach Tai Chi and Qigong, I should say, because I've been practicing Tai Chi and Qigong for 20 years now. And I started teaching 7 years ago. And so as I started teaching, for me, of course, that perfectionism, I'm like, I have to be good at this. I need to learn more. I can't be a teacher unless I'm learning more. I'm a student for life. I may be a teacher for life, but I'm also a student for life. So I'm like, okay, I want to learn more about Qigong, right? And so I was like, there's thousands of different types of Qigong. I want to be more versed in different styles of Qigong. Most of what Margie taught me was Tai Chi. Even though she brought in Qigong into the classes, I felt like I was lacking a foundation in Qigong and I wanted to explore that more. And so I started to explore that more. And as I was doing that, all of a sudden tapping came back on my radar. And I'm like, okay, I keep hearing about this tapping thing. And I didn't know what to expect. I thought it was like some music thing. I had no idea, right? Finally opened up this email about tapping and how it changes your brain chemistry and changes your belief system. And it's this powerful self-help tool. And I'm like, okay, you got me intrigued. I'm curious. I want to know more. And then I listened in on a summit, and all of a sudden I'm just like tapping along and I'm like, wow, I feel really good. This is amazing, because I always worked with affirmations, but affirmations just never made sense to me. And for me, it's because you can sit there and tell yourself all these positive things, but if you're just sweeping how you really feel about yourself under the rug without actually doing the true reprogramming and tapping into neuroplasticity, you're just bypassing yourself and your feelings, and it actually doesn't really work. Right. And whatever resists persists. So then as you resist how you really feel by trying to tell yourself, this is how I do feel, I am this, I am that, when you really have this inner critic voice and this damaged, wounded little girl who has no self-worth or self-acceptance, she's going to be like, fuck you, I don't really feel that way. And all of a sudden she's going to come out screaming when you don't really want her to. And all of a sudden you're fighting with everyone around you. You're fighting with yourself. And then you just take a step back. You're like, well, where did that come from? Yeah, that was the wounded little girl, because you're sweeping her under the rug and you're not validating how she really feels and allowing that to reprogram. And so it was just so fascinating to me when I discovered tapping. I was like, oh, that's why affirmations never worked for me and only frustrated me and made me feel like I was doing something wrong and I wasn't good enough. Because that's the thing. When you sit there and you're trying to tell yourself and be in this positive mindset and tell yourself you are this thing, you're worthy, you're worthy, you're worthy, but yet you have this programming that's telling you otherwise, that creates so much inner conflict, so much doubt, so much lack of trust. And how do you not spiral into, well, I see all these other people making money. I see all these other people looking beautiful and feeling confident. It's just not for me. It must not be for me. I'm not worthy of it. It's not for me in this life. Right. And all of a sudden you go into victim mode. Well, that doesn't serve anybody. Right. And so what I find with tapping, it was just like, once again, the other missing piece. So like I just had these missing pieces, the fermentation to help with the microbiome, because my microbiome was so depleted. And then like the tapping, which was to actually help with the neuroplasticity. And it was like really the combination of learning both of these and bringing both of these into my body that actually like just like took care of the OCD and just brought my anxiety significantly down and just allowed me to start being able to regulate my intense emotions and regulate my ADD and be able to just like kind of flow with the ebb and flow of life and see the obstacles coming, but not be inhibited by them, be more solution oriented, which is the wonderful Virgo qualities. Virgo's the reason why we're so detail oriented and analytical and intellectual. And we have all these wonderful qualities because we're really good at coming up with solutions. Right. So all of a sudden, as I'm starting to calm down that inner critic voice and regulate my microbiome and like my energy systems, all of a sudden, you know, I'm tapping into my authenticity and my trust and my intuition. It's just like, it's all like coming together and my body is healing. My body's feeling good. And I can just come up with solutions to my problems and not feel inhibited. Whereas before, the OCD would totally inhibit me. I have to control this. I have to control it. I can't control it, you know, like, and you just like go into the super hyper vigilant state. Well, all of a sudden I wasn't going in that state anymore. And all of a sudden I'm feeling calm and I'm feeling in my body. And I'm like, oh, wow, what an amazing feeling. You know, it's like, oh, this is the magic. You know, this is the authenticity. This is calming down the nervous system. This is feeling safe. This is feeling safe to be me. This is feeling safe to express myself. This is feeling safe to teach. This is feeling safe to learn. This is feeling safe to grow. This is feeling safe to be. Right. And so, like, in my journey of learning all these tools and practicing them, and I like to look at the whole collective, Tai Chi, QiGong, tapping, herbalism. I looked at it under the umbrella of neuroplasticity and self-care. So if I really just think about like, if I had to, because, you know, it's so much that I do, right? And I look at Tai Chi and QiGong as my weekly practices of understanding my relationship to my energy. So being able to tune in and be like, okay, what happens to my energy when I'm gathering? What happens to my energy as I'm coming down and close to my body? I feel that sinking sensation, right? So it's just tuning in, like when I bring my arm out like this in Tai Chi, like where's my energy going? When I bring my arms in, how does that make me feel as I'm drawing energy in? So to me, Tai Chi and QiGong is my weekly practice of understanding my relationship of my energy in relationship to the energy around me. Noticing how it moves, where my eyes go, where my intentions go, right? And then the tapping is the daily practice of bringing in the affirmations. And the way tapping makes affirmations work more effectively is you're tapping on these certain points of the body that actually send signals to your nervous system to calm down, that it's okay to feel safe. And when you tell your nervous system you can be safe and get out of that stress response, that primitive response that we go into, and we're going to go into it, whether we're looking at a bill that needs to be paid, whether we're thinking about that fight we had with our partner or our best friend, whether we're thinking about a childhood trauma, whether we're thinking and seeing that tiger behind that bush that's ready to leap out at us. It doesn't matter how severe the threat is or not is. Our nervous system is going to treat it like the tiger behind the bush, like we're about to die. Yeah. Right. And so, you know, tapping to me is just telling your body every day, telling your nervous system, it's safe. It's safe. It doesn't matter what the fuck is going on in this world. It doesn't matter what war we're in. It doesn't matter what bills you have to pay. You are safe. Yeah. Your body can feel calm. Your body can feel calm. Your body can feel calm no matter how stressful life is. Right. And tapping is, of course, used in so many different ways. Like there's so many different ways of working with tapping. My favorite is really the clinical tapping, working one-on-one and incorporating the inner child work, because that's where the juice and the magic happens for reprogramming, is you're really reprogramming what you inherited in those first 5 years, or even in the womb, or even from past lives, right? You're going into that subconscious and you are rewiring the subconscious from the original programming. And that's amazing. But that's the one-on-one work, right? But then there's like this intentional tapping that you can do every day. And it's just general tapping on your points to tell your nervous system, yeah, just be calm. It's okay. You can be calm today. You get to be calm today. Doesn't matter what happens. That person cuts you off and you're driving, you almost get into an accident. You can just sit there and tap to the points while you're driving very safely, of course. You're supposed to have two hands on the wheel, but you can, but I've done that, like where I get like triggered by stuff that's going on the road. It's just like, okay, even though this guy is a total jerk and he totally cut me off, I'm safe right here, right now. I'm totally safe and I'm still driving and I'm okay, and as I'm acknowledging what's happening and how I feel about it, like that was really frustrating, like that was really scary, like you're just honoring the voices that come up. And then you're telling yourself that I can still be safe, even though I feel this way. And then there's other amazing statements that can be used for intentional tapping where you're working with affirmations. And that's where you set the intentions of like, we tap on the side of the hand and we do even though and acceptance statements here. And then as we tap to the points, we just do shorter statements. But on the side of the hand, you can be like, even though I don't feel like I deserve to get paid $100 an hour for what I do, I still deeply and completely love and accept myself. And I am worthy of financial security, right? And so, you're stating the problem, but then you're also stating what you want. And you do that 3 times, then you go through the points. And when you do intentional tapping, you can go, take a deep breath in, and you can go, I clear and release all the ways that I don't feel like I'm worthy. And you can go through the points. I clear and release all the messages I was told when I was a child that I'm not worthy of being seen or heard. Side of the eyes, I release all scarcity, under that, I release all the ways that I've been told I might not be worth investing in new clothes, new shoes, new things for my kitchen, and so you can just like go through and you can be general, you can get specific, but you just go through the points and you just say what comes up, right? But you say, I clear and release all the ways, right? And then as you do that, then all of a sudden you can bring in what you want to. Once you calm down these feelings, then also you be like, I feel worthy of financial security. I feel worthy of taking that vacation, right? Sometimes I feel worthy of only working 4 days a week and having 3-day weekends so I can spend more time with my family. And I'm worthy of charging enough money so I can do that and still pay my bills, And so it's like you tap in what you want to feel. But you still have to first honor, that negative part of the problem, right? And so for me, being a Virgo, that made a whole lot of sense to me too, because I'm like, yeah, I want to solve that problem, which means you have to acknowledge that there's a problem. And a lot of people don't want to acknowledge there's a problem, right? And so tapping just made so much sense to me. But more than anything, it made sense because it worked. And holy shit. And when you are a girl who deals with lack of worth and OCD and high anxiety, abandonment, feeling alone and isolated, socially awkward, don't know how to make friends, I fucking figured it out. Fucking figured all that out. But it's one of these things that, the journey was so hard. And I didn't have tapping at that time, but once I found tapping, everything became so easy. Right. So tapping was that little like magic token for me, but I would have never discovered. Well, I probably would have because tapping is becoming more popular. But when I think about the whole picture, I wouldn't be doing what I do now, offering these amazing gifts to other people of supporting and holding space for them to feel safe in their emotions, because I've learned how to feel safe in my emotions, and holy shit, I have some big emotions, right? I scare people with my emotions without wanting to. It's just, they're so big, I can't contain them. But I learned how to contain them by releasing the excess and allowing what needs to be here. So it can be contained, so it can be shifted, it can be integrated, it can be worked, and it can be used in a way that serves me. And so who I am and all the things that have happened to me and all the things that I have learned have all been just magic for me, because now I'm in this place where, yes, people can come to me and I can hold space for your big emotions, because guess what? No one held space for mine, and I learned how to hold space for it, and I'm here to do that for you. And yes, I have these magic gifts and these tools that I can share with you. And I've studied them for 20 years, and you can come to me, and sometimes people get a little overwhelmed. So people have to, I have to gauge, how much information do you really want to take in right now? Do you need little doses, or are you like me and you can process a lot? Because I'll spew it out. It'll start just coming out. Take some notes. I'm a teacher after all. I'm not afraid to get into it. But it's so I do have to gauge my clients, of course. And I always tell my clients, just let me know, what you want. How do I serve you? How do I create the container for you? And what works for you and what doesn't, right? And let's just keep fine tuning, because I've got 20 years of experience and knowledge and this whole array of modalities, and not all of them are going to be for you. But let's fine tune and figure out what you need at this time. And then as we continue working with each other, what are the layers that get to add as we clear your layers? As we clear and shift your layers, we're making room for new things, new neuroplasticity, new lifestyle skills, new perspectives, new awareness, right? New ways of regulating your nervous system, new ways of increasing your creativity and focus and your empowerment and your confidence, right? And so as we work together, I get to just have that fun of guiding other people to trust their own intuition, which was my journey of learning how to trust mine, learning how to come into their own self-acceptance and self-love, which was also my journey of coming into self-acceptance and self-love. And so it's I get to help people. What took me 20 years to figure out, I get to help support people in a shorter period of time. And it's not like it's magic and overnight. I like to work with people for months at a time, because you don't get spiritual awakening and spiritual growth in just a few sessions, right? You get significant shifts, you get profound effects, right? That you feel as you're navigating your life afterwards. But to me, the real growth is the ongoing work, because it doesn't just stop. I'm going to continue doing this until I'm in my 80s. I'm never going to stop this spiritual growth, right? These are just all tools that I get to continue to work and circle back to. And every time I circle back, it's that spiral. It just keeps going. I feel grounded and anchored, but at the same time, I'm just spiraling up. It's just so freaking fantastic.
That's amazing. I just want to reflect back to what a beautiful self-healing journey you really just described. That's what I saw over the overarching. What you described was the way that you've healed yourself over and over and over again in all these different ways, and that you're helping to other people to heal themselves too. And it's just so beautiful. And yeah, it's so inspiring. Every time I hear you talk, in whatever setting it is, it's always so inspiring to me to see how dedicated you are to your self-healing journey. And so thank you so much for sharing your story. And it was so nice to get to know you on a more deep level.
Thank you. I know it's interesting talking about 20 or 30 years and an hour or whatever, but yeah. Without going into all the details like my Virgo self does.
It was amazing.
Yeah. So thank you so much for having me, and thank you everyone for listening. And it's such an honor and a pleasure, and so beautiful knowing you, Amelia, and being part of the collective, and being here.
I know it's funny how I came to one of it was a self-love workshop actually at the HPRC Connection years ago, and then there was just something I was like, I like her. I don't know.
You're one of the kids who do like me.
I was in the middle of my own spiritual awakening during that time, and then now somehow we reconnected, and here you are.
I know, right? And it's interesting too, because you saw me when you met me, and I was very much really immersed in all of this, but there was still things holding me back, right? So it's I was practicing what I was teaching, and I was teaching, and I was helping others, but there was still that something that I was I still there's something that's still not authentic, and I was having to leave my relationship. Right. So it's interesting, just to wrap up, because I know we're kind of closing up, as we went through this last 18 months of that whole North Node, South Node for me, like that was my pivot. That was me taking everything that I have accumulated and learned, and me finally coming into that trust and acceptance and being like, okay, this relationship is actually what is holding me back. I'm never going to find my worth. I'm never going to be successful in what I do unless I actually get out of this relationship. And so it was actually having that courage of breaking through and leaving that actually allowed me to learn how to fully receive. That was a big thing that I've talked to you a lot about this last year, was like learning how to receive on a cellular level. And now that's what I bring in with my clients too. It's like, oh yeah, no, I'm going to teach you how to receive, because now I've learned how to receive. So I'm going to teach you how to do that. Because that's a whole other thing for women, right? And so the last thing I like to say is, and this is what I always honor in my clients, because I had to honor it in myself. The reason why I've grown into the person that I've grown into, and the reason why I've been able to manage very severe high anxiety conditions like OCD and Hashimoto's, is because I allowed myself to push through moments of severe discomfort. Physical discomfort, emotional discomfort, spiritual discomfort. And I always honor that in my clients. And that's part of the safe space that I'm providing for them, is the safe container. So you can feel comfortable to go through that discomfort, because most of my life, I did not have a safe container to move through discomfort. And holy shit, that like it is so much more difficult. It's like you're moving through mud, but no mud, no lotus. But there are ways to make it easier to truck through that mud. And that's my gift that I want to pass on to other people, is these are the tools that you can use to make it easier to be that lotus blooming out of the mud. Right. But it does mean you have to go through discomfort, but you can feel safe doing so. And that's what tapping does. That's what spiritual resourcing does. That's the inner child work too. A big part of what I do is we tap into our spirits and our spirit guides, and we call upon that circle. And that circle of guides is with us when we do the work. And I set the intention so that circle of guides stays with my clients even after the work, and they get to tap into that resourcing. And that's where they draw upon their strength and courage to move through the discomfort. So it all circles back to spirit. And now I'm feeling comfortable circling back to the word God. I used to only be able to use the word universe or spirit, and now I can finally use the word God again, which is beautiful. And that's been part of my religious healing and coming into acceptance of spirituality. And so there's just so many profound things, but all of it has been because I've been courageous enough to move through discomfort. So
beautiful. Yeah. Well, what a beautiful note to end on. Thank you so much again.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Speaking of Spirituality. If you'd like to connect with me personally or book a session for Quantum Soul Alchemy, you can find me on Instagram at Ascending with Amelia. Have a beautiful day.